Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annika Manny. I'm your session moderator. I'm a consultant for the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, which is sponsoring today's conference. I just have a few housekeeping items before we launch into our great session. First, I'll ask that you please keep your microphones on mute when you're not speaking. We will have time for Q&A later, and you can absolutely unmute at that time. You can ask questions during the presentation using the chat function. We will be recording this session. It is recording now. And closed captioning, should you need it, is available throughout the session by clicking on the closed captioning button in your menu bar. So today's presentation is REMC Micro Credential for OER, and I'm pleased to welcome Melinda Waffle to the stage.
I need to unmute. Thank you, Annika. So I'm going to apologize in advance on many levels to everybody in the room. So the first is, I kid you not, at 2 o'clock we had a thunderstorm roll in, and it's pretty severe, and I apologize because I might have to bend down once in a while. It's because I have a dog in the room with me having an anxiety attack. So I apologize for that in advance. So I am going to share my screen, but the other reason I shared that for you is because I live in the country, so I do not have broadband. I am functioning off a hotspot. So we will just, if I need to, I will call in with audio, but if you lose me, I don't know that I'll try to reconnect. I'm just not sure. Unfortunately, this thunderstorm is supposed to be done in about the next 10-15 minutes. So if we make it through that, I think we'll be good to go. All right, so this presentation is about REMC's micro-credential program, of which we have one pathway for OER. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. We started down the micro-credential pathway about 1.5 years ago. So I'm going to go through the history, kind of pieces of the micro-credential so you understand how we're using it and what that means. And then we'll talk specifically about the OER pathway within that, with time for Q&A at the end. So my name's Melinda Waffle, and I'm the Professional Learning Coordinator for REMC Association of Michigan. And I'm actually new to this role, but I've been part of REMC for the 11 years prior. So I'm pretty excited about this program and where it's headed. So we need to start by just talking about, what is a micro-credential? So a micro-credential is kind of a badging system, but in the vein or the era of competency learning, it's a way to track some competency learning in a particular pathway. So it's like a micro certification, if you will, in a specific area. So that's how we think of it and how we're using it. And to give you a little history, our conceptualization of this actually happened in winter of 2019 into 2020. And as you know, in March of 2020, a lot of things got paused while those of us who support educators put things on hold and dealt with just helping our educators do pandemic learning. I won't even call it online learning. I'll call it pandemic learning because it was emergency learning. And then finally, last summer, we got back to it and began our preparation with it, our planning and our marketing. And we ran a first pilot last winter, kind of establishing our processes, a smaller pilot so that we could, make sure our processes that were in place worked. And we refined those a lot. And then the spring into summer, we had our second pilot, our beta pilot, with just refinement and with larger numbers to get feedback and to make sure we're on the right path. So our current location in this is we will be heading mainstream this fall. So pieces are in place, probably September. You're going to see, if you are on our newsletter or you see other REMC tidbits, there's going to be marketing about it later. And I apologize, you might have noticed my power is going on and off again due to the storm. So anyway, we're hoping to go mainstream this winter. So I will turn off my video so that's not distracting to people, because I'm guessing it's going to keep flickering. Okay, so that's a little bit of our history and the why. Why are we even looking at this? So one of the conundrums for REMC is we provide a lot of professional development, and they common complaint among all educators is they're just kind of these one-offsies here and there. And so micro-credential was presented to me as a way that we could take or look at our professional learning opportunities a little bit differently, so they could, if you will, be bundled together. So we could kind of group them together so they had more meaning. And with that in mind, then our goals began with this, that a micro-credential would demonstrate a deeper learning for the participants, because they wouldn't have just a single class on a larger topic or a big topic. And you'll see when we look at pathways what I mean by that. But it would also promote classroom application. So they're not just learning about it, but they're applying it, and also encourage deeper reflection on both their own learning and then their practice in the classroom. So the big goal is obviously to have a positive impact for student learning and teacher practice in the classroom. With the help of some consultants that we work with through Advanced Learning Partnerships, and then through support from Dell Technologies, we were able to get some consultants who have experience with this to help us as we began down this path. And we went through the pilot. There were 17 micro-credentials, our inaugural REMC Micro-credentials awarded. And we just opened up 2 pathways for those pilots. However, in addition to that, we established 7 total pathways that people could bundle their learning together to earn a micro-credential. And we established an evaluative process and a lot of support documents. So that's a little bit of the history about the micro-credential and where we are at with that and how it's grown. The 7 pathways that we have bundled underneath are listed right here. The 2 with the asterisks are the 2 that were used during the pilots. Design and implement an online learning environment. I am guessing after the last 18 months, you can hypothesize pretty easily why that one was one we implemented during this last year and a half of COVID. So that was our primary one that we implemented during the last year, the last school year. Blended and online learning, which is more of a focus in not designing the classroom, but actually engaging in that blended and online learning with a variety of tools or activities or teaching practices. And then student engagement and collaboration. That was the other one we used during the pilot. Again, it seemed to really support what teachers were having to do last year, so we focused in on that. And then we have a goal-driven growth, reflection, and refinement, which is a lot with data. And then using OER for teaching and learning. And then we have one that design and computational thinking for computer science. And then the final one is digital literacy and citizenship. So those are the 7 pathways that we have developed. And as we began looking at these pathways, you'll notice they're color coded on there. It occurred that they really kind of fall into some bigger containers. And when we broke those out, you can see those are our badges right there. We ended up with 3 categories where they all fell in, and we feel these are categories that will allow us to grow over time if we want to add additional pathways. So some are about the learning environment, then the growth and assessment area, and then finally teaching for learning, which is a more content driven, I'll say. You'll notice that was the OER, the digital literacy, and the computer science areas. So more of those that fit into content in the classroom. So our process, so I'm going to in the next few minutes kind of wrap up the overview of micro-credentialing before we talk specifically about the OER micro-credential. So the process is people will sign up. And when they sign up, they actually will use our registration system. It isn't one that has a deadline. It's just an open registration. So we know who is interested in pursuing it. And so we can send them regular communications about it. And they will receive participant information, including a lot of support documents. Once they sign up and get those initial documents, the first task they do is pick the micro-credential pathway. So they select that pathway. After that, they plan. So they identify which trainings will be completed or that they have already completed to meet the pathway criteria. So as noted in there, appropriate trainings must add up to 27 hours worth of learning credit. And so for, K-12 teachers, we're talking like the equivalency of 27 sketch hours. Do they have to get sketches with it? No, they don't. It's just that's what the training must add up to. We felt that was enough variety and depth that it would really contribute to their learning and their application in the classroom, but not be overwhelming. In fact, most of our teachers who participated in the pilot completed their training and did their micro-credential in about a 3-month period. Though we're anticipating more people will spread that out probably over a 5 or 6 month period to kind of keep it a little more manageable. Not everybody is a front runner with that, and we know that. Any trainings completed in the last 18 months prior to the submission window can count. And the reason we set that in place is I'm sure if you've had any experience even with OER, things change a lot. And so we felt that anything more than a year and a half old might be a little bit outdated, and it was worth revisiting that training or going to something that was more recent and more up to date. So when they do their submission, just that 27 hours of training have to be in the last year and a half. After they kind of plan out what they're going to do, they choose which submission window they want to submit at. So we're settling, because we're just moving out of pilot, and these decisions were actually just made in the last week. We're settling on a winter submission date of December 31st and then a summer one of June 30. And you might say, why December 31st and June 30? That's when teachers are not in school, when you're talking K-12 teachers. And even higher ed teachers, December is definitely a time that a school is not in session, and June might be in a summer session. And the reason being, we recognize that people can turn in their artifact at any time. Doesn't matter when they turn it in. So by having those dates, it allowed flexibility for those who wanted to do it when they were in the traditional work schedule could do that. But it also gave some time outside when most teachers are teaching to allow them off time to create their artifact. So there's no limit on when they're turned in. That is just the deadlines we set for those windows, so that then we have a set time where the evaluations are taking place. And the evaluations then of all artifacts submitted over the previous 6 months would be evaluated in really the 2 weeks after that deadline. But we say month just in case this explodes out of control and we have more to evaluate than we anticipate. So that's what happens. So after a person chooses which submission window they're going to do, they actually prepare, and part of that's taking the training, but part of it is also applying it in their classroom practices or with their students, and they begin collecting their evidence of their growth and how it's impacting student learning to plan their video artifact. We also during that time provide regular communication, about once a month communication with upcoming trainings that apply to the different pathways, live webinars to support their progress in creating and submitting. And then as they collect their evidence of their growth within the pathway, they should actually very quickly then be able to create and submit if they're doing it along the way. Now, we did have some people who just waited and kind of tried to pull everything at the end. The feedback from them was actually that was a little bit harder because they had to think back to all the classes that they or trainings that they took and how it impacted their classroom, because their classroom practice had changed so much. It was already embedded, and it was like, okay, what was it like before compared to what it is now? So then the final step is obviously to do that creation, and they create a 6 to 8 minute video artifact and then submit it. for review. So one of our key things throughout this process that we wanted to adhere to is micro-credentials are considered pretty rigorous, and we want to make sure that they stay rigorous. They should support that, yes, a teacher has really changed their practice and it's positively impacting their classroom and student learning. So that's really a key outcome that we want. All right, so that's about a 12-minute overview of the micro-credential process in case you're completely unfamiliar with it. I'm going to take a little break here and look at the chat, or if anybody has any question about that before I go specifically into our OER pathway, I will answer those questions right now before we move on. Somebody else's dog has anxiety issues. I appreciate hearing that because mine is on a chair he's not supposed to be on right now, curled up in a little ball, but the storm has passed. All right, any questions? You're welcome to turn on your microphone and ask or post them in the chat. I'll give about 30 seconds more, and if there are none, then I'll move ahead. I don't know about the rest of you. I've gotten much better about wait time in the last 18 months, that's for sure. All right, so specifically our OER pathway. So this is kind of where our OER professional learning kind of is married to our micro-credential pathway. Okay, buddy. So this is the badge, the actual badge for the OER pathway. This one is really focused on teaching and learning, and our kind of description or our goal with it is that educators pursuing this pathway actually curate, utilize, and modify OER with appropriate Creative Commons licensing to enhance student learning and or improve their instructional practice, along with extending their own contributions back to the wider educational community. So when you read that, what you should gather from that is our goal isn't just they learn about OER, it's that they do with OER. They're actually finding it to use in their classroom. They're modifying it, either revising or remixing it, and giving it the appropriate licensing. And then they're also contributing back to the community. So the trainings that we offer, yeah, there are some that might just focus on what is OER, but because they need to get 27 hours of training, they can't stay at that level of learning, of just learning about OER. The training forces them to branch into these other areas with what their offerings are, what they can take in order to do this. So that is the focus of our OER micro-credential. And the reason being, I'm not sure who's on the call, but I've actually been part of the OER strategy team that MDE organized way back in February of, I don't know how many years ago. I think it's been 4 or 5 years ago, because I had an interest in OER for about 10 years now. I actually, where it really kicked into importance for me was I attended the Michigan Moodle Moot, not the Michigan Moodle, the US Moodle Moot in Minnesota several years ago, and listening to a couple of presentations on it really showed me how it can impact education on so many levels. So I've been part of the strategy team since then. Specifically, I'm part of the professional learning subgroup in that team and have been throughout. And one of our concerns with professional learning is we can get the surface level understanding, but how do we encourage people to go deeper? How do we encourage them to actually modify OER? How do we encourage them to contribute back to the community? I find it interesting, a lot of teachers that I talk to, they don't want to give back to the community because they feel like their stuff isn't good enough. So kind of how do we overcome that fear that, oh yeah, it's good enough for my classroom, but I don't think other people would want it. So that's where we felt like the micro credential, because I've talked to the team about this, where this OER micro credential can come into play because, oh, you can show you don't even just know about OER, but you're actually utilizing them and you're making changes, you're demonstrating, revising and remixing it to make it customized for what your students need in your classroom, because their needs might be different than the needs of another person who's using it in their classroom, and then also sharing back to the community. So that's where we feel this really pushes in to move educators to a different level of not only understanding but using OER. With all of our micro credentials, there are 4 competencies areas that we're looking at with regardless of the pathway. And that's the capacity, the participant's capacity, student outcomes, mindset, and network. So for our OER one with capacity, we want to make sure they understand and apply safe and ethical practices to create, use, and remix OER. I'm not sure where everybody in this room where their understanding is with OER, but we find a lot of people, their surface level knowledge that they don't even know that free is different than OER, or that can have a Creative Commons license, but if it's got the no derivatives, it's not OER. So making sure that there's this depth of knowledge and how to use OER content. And then student outcomes, that students engage in learning experiences that are authentic and reflect differentiated access to content. So student learning experiences reflect opportunities to also be producers of content. And like the differentiation might be as simple as, if I'm using a textbook and I have a student with visual impairment, actually under copyright, unless the copyright in the textbook specifically says otherwise, I can't make a recording of text for the student to listen to. Whereas if it's OER content, they understand, oh, I could make a recording or have another student or another adult make a recording of text for my visually impaired students. And because it's OER, I know that it's ethical and it's appropriate, and it's a positive impact on a student in my classroom. So that we're learning that. And then also that we're beginning to introduce our students to this, this idea that we can share resources in ways other than with traditional copyrights. And then mindset, third competency, is that it demonstrates a shift in ownership of learning to the learner, and as well as recognition that learning can happen anytime, anywhere, and from any source. And then finally, the network piece of it, that it facilitates personalized access to content for students based upon their voice, choice, and authenticity from sources beyond the classroom. So those are the competencies with the OER that we are looking for in the artifact that they demonstrate, in the artifact that they would submit. As far as REMC goes right now, we have a variety of options for educators who are looking to do the OER micro-credential this fall or next year. We offer 4 virtual courses. So when I say virtual courses, if you're not familiar with REMC virtual courses, they're all worth 10 sketches or 10 hours. Teachers don't have to get sketches. Key thing is our courses are free for every Michigan educator. It doesn't matter what level, what role, they are free for all Michigan educators to take. And even the sketches are free. So teachers who have to renew certificates not only can take the course for free, but then if they submit the sketch documentation, they also can get the 10 sketches for free. And they are not virtual in that they're self-paced. They are a combination of synchronous and asynchronous. They have instructors who moderate the course. So all the courses have at least 2 webinars tied to them. So that's some asynchronous time, but then people work on the assignments and the readings and those pieces and their what they create to demonstrate their application of what they've learned on their own time. All our courses are 3 weeks long. So they typically start the first Monday of a month and go for 3 weeks, and then they're completed. So it's kind of a small window, mix of synchronous and asynchronous with a facilitator moderating. And again, they're all free. So there are 4 of them that contribute towards the OER micro-credential, and those four are listed here. Are they offered every month? No, because they're moderated. We obviously have a limit in capacity, but we rotate through these. So all four of these are offered at least once, and most of them are offered twice a year, because we do have quite a few virtual courses. Something new to the OER is we have a webinar series that's going to be implemented this fall, probably closer to winter, November, December, January. And those are shorter tidbits. So they're only 2 to 3 sketches and versus the 10, and they consist of a webinar that's 60 to 90 minutes. And then to complete it for the sketch credit or for the hours towards the micro-credential, the person creates something. They like take what they learned about and do something with it afterward, usually applying it in their classroom. So we will have this webinar series of 6 different webinars that are available as another way to earn some of those hours towards the micro-credential. And then finally, we've had 2 workshops the last 2 summers that are a varying number of hours that teachers also have learned about OER and done work with. In this case, these are both alignment workshops where teachers learned about OER, learned about how they're used, modifying them, etc. But then also helped us align some of the resources in Go Open Michigan, Michigan's repository, to core standards, or else to the MyTex, the competencies also. So any teacher who wants, or educator, doesn't even have to be a teacher, who wants to earn the OER micro-credential, so our OER for teaching and learning micro-credential, would look at these and pick what they wanted to take, what was appropriate for them, because we know not everybody comes in with the same background and the same level of understanding. And then they would pick and choose which pieces they wanted to complete in order to get that equivalency of at least 27 hours. One thing I found interesting in our pilot phase, almost a third, between a quarter and a third of the people who participated actually did extra. So they did beyond because they felt they wanted to learn even more. So that 27 is a minimum. People can do as much beyond that as they want, but people would pick and choose what they want to do. They would earn their 27 hours worth, and then they would be ready to create their artifact that they would submit for the micro-credential. So I actually have 2 samples. Now, neither of these are OER samples from the standpoint that the OER was not used during our pilot, because we really focused on areas that would help teachers during last year, which was its own beast. However, I'm going to actually show one because I think it's useful to see what an artifact looks like. So what are teachers actually doing to demonstrate the impact on their classroom? So I'm going to play part of Nancy's. I actually opened it in advance. My fear is this showing my tab or is it showing my window? Okay, I'm looking at the chat at the same time. Can somebody just tell me if you see a different screen? You see, and it says design and implement an online learning environment for a video.
We do.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, and I'm going to answer Kimberly's question because I just see that on there. She asked if artifacts are submitted after each course webinar. No, the artifact is only done after you're done with that 27 hours. So they only have to create it once at the end, and it's kind of a culmination activity of all that learning. So here is Nancy's example.
My name is Nancy Blount, and I teach K-4 general music, middle and high school choir, and theater. This reflection is for the micro-credential design and implement an online learning environment. I am not new to this environment, but before I took the REMC classes, I was only using Google Classroom, and even that had me a bit overwhelmed. There were no interactive assignments, no hyperlinks, no slides. I wasn't seeing much engagement from my students either. Google Classroom was the only platform I was really comfortable with. I had heard of Seesaw, but who had extra time to learn another online platform? Then came COVID, which caused me to rethink much of my teaching. After making the most out of Google Classroom, my vision changed. I started making the categories and assignments look more inviting with different fonts and with the use of the extension emoji keyboard, adding clip art to draw the attention of the students. It worked. Some of my high school students even asked me how I did that. I was able to show them. And now some of their questions, comments, and assignments are more attractive to me. We had engagement. Putting that together with the class, applying Google Apps for Education, made my Google Classrooms come alive. Screencastify made it easier to teach virtually. But the one thing that made the biggest impact was Bitmoji Classrooms. Oh yeah. And not only did it help the students get their attention, but it became so much fun for me to create lessons. Doesn't this look like much more fun to create and for the kids to go to and be able to click on hyperlinks to listen to the story, listen to the music, than just doing it? It was much more fun and I saw much more engagement. OER, Open Educational Resources, have been around for quite some time. If you use YouTube, and who hasn't used YouTube, you have used OER. But when I took the class, What, Why, and How of OER, those resources became a gold mine. I was part of a pilot program in 2019 through Carnegie Hall called Musical Explorers. This program opened up the world of music to my rural students. They got to meet online musicians from all over the world, got to learn their cultures, their songs in different languages and dances. I saw my students get excited every time they came to music, and their hearts were expanding as they heard about situations that children their age faced in other countries and even other parts of the United States. This really made a difference for them. And imagine my excitement when during the class, one of the OERs they said was a great resource was Musical Explorers. In the fall and all throughout the school year, I made time to learn Seesaw by taking multiple Seesaw classes through REMC. Am I glad that I did? Seesaw made my teaching life so much easier. Last year during the shutdown, I taught using packets, and we all know how time-consuming creating packets can be. This year I implemented Seesaw along with Google Classroom. What a difference it made. The students were excited, I was excited, my students were engaged, and I had fun creating assignments. Here are two examples of my Seesaw assignments for K through second grade. The students also loved being able to record themselves, showing me what they were doing and reflect on the assignment using their voice. You can see up in the corner, up here, and then down here, how a student had shared with me what he had done. One of the things I had hoped was that my students would take a vital interest in the online lessons. It was happening. In my high school choir, one of their Google Classroom assignments was to listen to a Christmas carol a day through December and January. Then they were to reflect on the information I gave them and talk about the song. They even started making suggestions of carols to listen to. One student shared a piece of trivia that I didn't even know about the Grinch song. That led to some great discussion about the heart of the Grinch and kindness. I hoped my students would have more voice in the online lessons. This definitely happened, and when the students came back face to face, they were more apt to use their voice in class discussions or online. I had hoped my students would look forward to what might be coming next. Many students started sending me comments like this: I can't wait to see what happens next. I set my alarm to wake up early so I can see what you have posted. My students were looking forward to my lessons. I had hoped my students would complete more assignments. I had almost a 70% increase in completed assignments from the year before. Something was changing, and I was thrilled. And lastly, I hoped that my students would take their learning to a new level. I was observing my classes pay closer attention. They listened more for examples of music we had studied. They would share with me things like, I heard bluegrass music this weekend, or I heard music that sounded like Beethoven in a movie. They were making connections. Many students who had not shared out loud in class in the past were now excited to share with me and their classmates the connections they were making. And because they were using Flipgrid, microphones, and video on Seesaw, I was able to track their growth with this recorded evidence. My classes were full of students with a growth mindset. The things I learned from these online classes literally changed my teaching mindset. The technology that I thought was too overwhelming to learn actually made teaching easier. I shared all of my learning with my colleagues. Several were really excited and even took some Seesaw classes. Some were overwhelmed and gave the same excuses I had used. So they would come to me for help, but weren't ready to break out of the cage. I still have some work to do. I have shared created lessons in the Seesaw library for others to use. This collaboration has become invaluable. I am feeling empowered. My classes and teaching will never be the same. In many ways, the lockdown and pandemic were horrible, but I consider it a blessing because it gave me opportunities to better myself for my students and their online learning environment.
Okay, so that was Nancy's submission. We're not going to look at another one because of the time. Where are we next? We're actually going live with our full mainstream. I think you can see from Nancy's example, we feel like I could have shown you any of our submissions. They were all rock star like that. I kid you not. We feel like it's meeting our goals, that teachers aren't just sitting and getting, which is a complaint, obviously, of a lot of professional learning that I hear, but they're actually applying it, and it's having impact on their classroom and their own excitement as a teacher. So that has been very heartening, and we're very excited to watch where this will grow from here. So this fall, like I said, we're going to go mainstream, and it will see where it goes and grows from here. We're excited about the OER one because we feel it can do the same thing with OER, that it can take people to that deeper level where they're really seeing impact in their classroom and not just having the surface level knowledge of what it is. So it's something we're very excited to see happen. Our other next step that we're exploring, and I hope to do this in the next couple months, is we are going to be reaching out to other groups to see, share our process. All of our stuff is actually OER. So if there are people who want to venture, other groups that want to venture down this path with us, they can have our processes, or maybe there are ways that we can partner together to create pathways that utilize training from multiple entities. So those are some of the possibilities we want to explore in the next couple of months from a management standpoint. So I want to give the rest of the time. I was hoping to give 10 minutes. We're down to about 8 for any questions that you might have. I'll put that on the screen. There's my email. You can feel free to email me, but also if you want to turn on your audio and ask questions or post any in the chat, that's what the remainder of this time is for. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so it's easier to watch the chat. Any questions?
Feel free to unmute to ask a question. It's a small group today.
Yes. My lights are back on. I'll turn on the video.
Melinda, thank you for the presentation. What is the background? Are most of the participants K through, or most of the participants who actually take the courses K through 12 teachers and instructors, or are they a mix between K through 12 and higher education who are getting the micro credentialing?
Our primary audience historically is K-12. I'm seeing OER kind of is becoming one of those areas where we're kind of mixing a little bit, but our courses and the micro credential is open to any Michigan educator. So that doesn't matter. They do not have to be limited by being K-12. Some of the courses or the sessions, it is important to pay attention to because they are targeting a specific grade level. For instance, we have a webinar series that's going to be coming out in about 6 weeks that it's about computer science, but it's focused for, some of them are focused for K2, some are focused for 3-5 and 6-8. So whenever that happens, that's part of the title. So people know that the examples in that course will be focused for that level. But our instructors overall are very, very great, whatever level people end up in there, whatever their experience, background, whatever level they teach, they try to incorporate examples from different levels to meet the needs of whoever's in the course. So while historically we are K-12, it does not stop anybody who is post-secondary from participating at all.
Great, thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions? All right, well, hearing none, thank you very much for joining today, and I hope you learned some useful information. And if you know of people who are interested, make sure to direct them our way. Like I said, beginning of September is actually when on our website, which is, I'll even put it in the chat, remc.org, there will be a page just for micro-credentialing where people can learn more information and sign up. And it will also start going through our marketing. But I encourage you to check out remc.org anyway. We have a lot of free resources. All of our materials are free. We have classroom resources and we have professional learning, and all of it is usable by any Michigan educator. So please feel free to share those with others you think might find it useful.
Great. Thank you so much, Melinda. I appreciate the presentation. This concludes this session. Our next session will begin at 3:20, and it's going to be a fabulous panel of students. So I highly recommend that you check that out. And we hope to see you again in a future session. Thank you very much.